I've been playing video games since I was about 5 years old, which means I've been gaming longer than a lot of you people watching this video have been alive. And for about 14 of those 20 years, I've been playing online multiplayer first-person shooters. That's a lot of years and a lot of games. And in this video, I'm going to be taking a stroll down memory lane and talking about all the online FPS games I've played over the years, specifically the ones that were player versus player. There's no real point to this video aside from that though. I'm not going to be offering any crazy deep insight into these games or use some nostalgic video filter or try to make myself sound smarter than I am when I talk about these games. I'm just going to say what online FPS games I've played from the time I was about 12 years old to the present day. Talk about what I liked, what I hated, maybe flash some milkers on the screen to keep up the viewer retention, maybe talk about the community reception to the games and any fond memories I have, and ultimately talk about why I stopped playing those games and move on. A lot of the gameplay won't be mine since some of these games are a bit harder to capture gameplay for these days, or I don't have the game installed and I didn't want to spend 90 hours waiting for them to install. Looking at you, Call of Duty. Anyways, look out for video credit whenever I use somebody else's gameplay both on the screen and in the description. And just so you're aware, there's gonna be a lot of yapping in this video, okay? Like I said, this isn't some video essay where I do a structured analysis of each game. I'm literally just typing my thoughts into a Word document and then recording the audio. So if you don't want to listen to the entire video and just want to know my thoughts on a specific game I played, there's also some timestamps in the description. But without further ado, let's talk about the first online FPS game I ever played. It's hardly a unique one, but it's still a goated game to start with. It was the summer between 6th and 7th grade when a kid I went to school with invited me over to his house to play some video games on Xbox 360. This was the start of a great friendship and the start of my love for online first-person shooters. I don't think I would have gotten as hooked as I did if it wasn't for the fact that Black Ops was my first game. It just had this vibe to it. The whole Cold War spy setting, the weapons being kind of old but still modern looking, the way the weapons sounded, everything down to the announcer's voice had a level of care put into it. As you can imagine though, I was pretty dogshit at the game. Up until this point, I mostly played games on Nintendo consoles and their controllers are always kinda different. So going from playing Zelda or Super Mario with a Wii remote to playing Black Ops Online was pretty rough. Another thing I had working against me was my teammates. Anyone who played online FPS games in the early 2010s can tell you that they were straight up vicious. I was learning a new insult and a new slur every match, and all of them were being directed at me. Timmy No Thumbs with his default no-skin attachment MP5K with 1 kill and 17 deaths. To be honest, I probably would have quit if I wasn't playing with my friend. You see, back in the day, the people who made FPS games were pretty cool, and they had this thing called split screen. Using this revolutionary technology, you could play multiplayer with your buddy in the same room. Anytime I would get my ass chewed out by the entire lobby, my best friend would say to me, "Yeah, they're right, dude, you suck at this game." But eventually, he realized I wasn't gonna learn how to play the game if I kept dying every 5 seconds, so he loaded up some zombies. Now, I could make an entire video about how great Black Ops 1 Zombies is, but we're here to talk about the multiplayer, so I'll try to cut to the chase. Me and my buddy used zombies as a way for me to learn how to move around and shoot, and after a little while, we hopped into local multiplayer against recruit-level bots, so I could learn the multiplayer mechanics like kill streaks, equipment, attachments, all that good stuff. Then when I was finally ready, we hopped back into online multiplayer, and I still got my ass handed to me. But instead of going 1 and 17, I was going 3 and 15. This was the start of a weekend tradition where I would head over to my buddy's house and play split-screen online Black Ops with him. Eventually, I even got my own copy of Black Ops on the Nintendo Wii. FPS games back in these days didn't have crossplay, so unfortunately I still couldn't play with my friend unless I went to his house. And even if they did have crossplay, well, anyone watching who also played Black Ops on the Wii knows that it was a bit different from the 360 version of the game. Nowhere near as bad as Black Ops on the DS, but the graphics were a lot worse. Some of the content was missing, some of the maps were made smaller so they could run on the Wii, and it never got any of the DLC, so the only zombies map was Kino der Toten. But even on this neutered version of Black Ops 1, I still had a ton of fun with the multiplayer. And since the Wii version of Black Ops never got any updates, this was basically a permanent 1.0 version of Black Ops multiplayer. Was there a certain overpowered loadout that got nerfed on the other consoles? Not on the Wii. Ghost Pro and Galil turning the game into a camp fest? Too bad, fucko. I don't know how prominent the suppressor camping meta was on the other consoles, but because of the fact that the Wii never got any balance updates, the multiplayer in Black Ops 1 was campy as fuck. This is probably my biggest problem with Black Ops multiplayer. Everyone played like a rat, sitting in corners with suppressed assault rifles till they got enough kills for their kill streaks. Then you basically couldn't move around because if a corner camper didn't get you, the attack dogs would. The one silver lining is that since most people on the Wii were aiming with a fucking Wii remote, a lot of the time you could avoid dying by bobbing and weaving. Still though, I had a lot of fun with Black Ops multiplayer, probably because it was the first multiplayer FPS I ever played. But a new Call of Duty releases every year, and I wanted to take a look at the Call of Duty game I missed the year before.
Fucking game and talking.
Shoot a gun, dog. Learn how to fucking shoot a gun, you
fucking riot shield. What else am I gonna do?
Oh, riot shield! I'm a pussy that use riot shield!
Oh, now I'm a what do you want me to use? You tell me what you
You're
want me to fucking use.
Tennis prestige, you fucking
Tell me what to fucking use, huh? Tell me what to fucking use, huh? Tell me what to fucking use to play the fucking game, and I'll fucking hurt you. You fucking cock-fucking
pussy.
That's right. Yum, 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 I eat dick all day. Yum, 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 I eat dick.
You wanna fight? You eat dick? What a fucking homo.
Exactly.
You eat dick.
Alright, I'm not gonna yap about this game anywhere near as long as I did with Black Ops. 1, because I didn't play Modern Warfare 2 anywhere near as much as Black Ops. 2, because it wasn't my first FPS game, so I can skip that part of the story. My buddy who got me into Black Ops got a used copy of Modern Warfare 2, and we checked out the multiplayer after playing Special Ops. Whereas Black Ops was quiet corner camping lobbies occasionally broken up by the sound of a kill streak, Modern Warfare 2 was complete chaos. At the time of release, Modern Warfare 2 was the most ambitious and wide-scale multiplayer in the franchise. And it showed because this shit was not balanced at all. But it was unbalanced in the best way. Rather than having one or two things that are busted while everything else is dog shit, everything was overpowered in Modern Warfare 2. Model 1887, busted. One-man army, busted. Killstreak kills counting towards other killstreaks, busted. Quick scoping, busted. F2000, dog shit. Commando, busted. You get the point. To this day, this is still one of the best multiplayers Call of Duty has put out in my opinion. Maybe my opinion would change if I played a little more than I got to, but by the time I got my own copy of MW2 on the PlayStation 3, all the lobbies were absolutely infested with hackers. And since there wasn't a version available on the Wii, which is probably a good thing, I pretty much missed out on the glory days of this multiplayer. And those days were glorious from what I can see. You guys remember how big of a cultural impact Fortnite was? Modern Warfare 2 was basically 2009's Fortnite. I didn't notice it at the time because I didn't have internet in 2009, and I was still playing PlayStation 2 and Nintendo Wii. But to anyone who was in touch with entertainment culture, this game was everywhere. Every kid in middle school and high school was talking about it. The game got banned in some countries because of the campaign. Hell, even my stepdad, who never played video games, played through this game's campaign. But since I basically had no way to keep playing Modern Warfare 2 outside of my buddy's house and he preferred Black Ops 1, I was essentially forced to stop playing Modern Warfare 2. However, the same can't be said for its sequel. Modern Warfare 3 was the next multiplayer game I put a good amount of time into. Now this comes with a caveat. Once again, I was playing the Nintendo Wii version. But if I were to pick a favorite between the two, Modern Warfare 3 on the Wii was way better than Black Ops on the Wii. This mostly comes down to the fact that neither one of the Wii versions of these games received updates, so whatever the game shipped with is what you got stuck with. And for some reason, Black Ops on the Wii only shipped with one zombies map, while Modern Warfare 3 had every survival map. The online multiplayer on the Wii was functional, but it had the same problems that Black Ops on the Wii did. There were no patches, so whatever busted bullshit the multiplayer had at launch stayed that way for its entire life cycle. Also, I ran into like one or two hackers on the Wii version of Black Ops, but the anti-hacking technology on MW3 Wii was fucking atrocious. Even like a year after the game's launch, I'd say 1 in every 5 games on the Wii had a hacker in it. Usually a Call of Duty game took 3 or 4 years to get this bad. Funny story, I remember one hacker I ran into was like an 8-year-old kid with the FaZe clan tag, and I shit you not, when I called him out for hacking, his exact words were, "You're just mad cause I'm in the FaZe clan." Yeah, sure buddy. But enough about the negatives. What did I like about Modern Warfare 3's multiplayer? To be honest, there's not a lot I can think of that really stood out to me. I think support kill streaks and specialists were pretty cool, and I appreciate that they made a genuine effort to balance the game, unlike Modern Warfare 2, but it kind of resulted in the worst possible game balance where a few things were just way better than everything else, and like I said before, that's way worse than everything being overpowered. Also, the launch maps were just way too bland, and the color palette made it easy for people to just sit in dark corners with suppressed rifles like they did in Black Ops. This was made even worse by the trash-ass graphics on the Wii. Now, I played the hell out of it nonetheless, but I don't think I would have if I had any other options. But eventually, I was forced to stop playing MW3 online when my family could no longer afford to pay for the internet. However, around that time, our parents got us an Xbox 360 with Modern Warfare 3 and 4 controllers, which is probably why they couldn't afford the internet anymore, but to be honest, looking back on it, I had way more fun playing MW3 split-screen 2v2s with my brothers than I did online. Yeah, we were screen hopping each other all the time. Yes, we always tried to bullshit each other by saying we had a UAV. Yes, we got in fights about it. But take it from someone who got to experience both. Those split-screen multiplayer days with my brothers were a lot more fun than some of the modern FPS games I've played since then. And it wasn't just Modern Warfare 3 we played split-screen. Before I get into the Halo section of this video, I'm gonna go ahead and say that aside from a couple hours in Halo Infinite, I've never played a Halo game online. But I did play a shit ton of Halo Reach and Halo 4 with my brothers on split screen. You know, back when Halo actually had split screen. I don't have a ton of insight to offer on the multiplayer of either of these games. I know a lot of people don't like Halo Reach and Halo 4's multiplayer modes because they departed a lot from Halo 2 and 3, but since they were the only frame of reference I had for the series, I loved them. I did prefer Halo Reach over Halo 4 purely for one reason: Forge. You know, back when Halo had a good Forge mode. If I was able to tally up the time, I probably spent more time making Forge maps on Halo Reach than I did playing them with my brothers, but it was just a ton of fun to make maps in that game. And yes, much like Modern Warfare 3, we screen hopped on each other like all of the time. We also banned the rocket launcher at one point because it was such a brain-dead easy weapon to use. But like I said earlier, I don't have much insight in terms of the balancing or game design of either of these games, since I only ever played them locally on split screen, and neither me or my brothers really gave a shit about the meta. But eventually we got our hands on a second Xbox 360, so the split screen days with my brothers started to fizzle out since we weren't all trying to play the same Xbox at the same time. This didn't stop me from playing multiplayer games though, because there was another Call of Duty game releasing soon that I was absolutely pumped for. Call of Duty Ghosts was the first Call of Duty game I was legit hyped for. Yes, I know that's sad to hear for a lot of you, but I was like 14 years old. Give me some slack. Now, there was just one problem that I'm sure you're used to hearing by now. We still didn't have internet for the first few months I had the game, and even after we got it, I didn't have the money to pay for an Xbox Live Gold subscription. So I was pretty much stuck playing this game offline against bots. Now, if you were active in the Call of Duty community when this game first released, you would know that most of the community hated this game. Most of the maps were kinda shit because they wanted to copy Battlefield and put in big maps without adding more players to compensate, and to make matters worse, you died in like half a second because the time to kill in this game was so fast. This resulted in a campy ass meta, way worse than any of the previous Call of Duty games I mentioned. But since I was 15 and just happy to be playing a Call of Duty game, I didn't really care. And since I was mostly playing against bots, the camping meta was never a problem for me. Flaws aside, Call of Duty Ghosts did a few things I really liked. The squad system it had for creating classes is probably my favorite of any of the Call of Duty games. You could have multiple soldiers saved and each one of them had 5 classes each. The Create a class operated on a point system that I kinda wish they brought back too. You could use points to pick more weapons and attachments, or if you wanted, you could ditch the weapons and just get a bunch of perks instead. More powerful perks costed more points, you get the idea. The kill streaks in the game were also set by class, so you didn't always have to remember to switch to all the recon kill streaks if you were running a recon loadout. They also had this thing called field orders where you could complete a small challenge and get a kill streak unique to the map you were playing. In the DLC maps, they really went crazy with this. On one of the DLC maps, you could play as the Predator, and another one even had ghost pirates you could call in. Also, this is unrelated to the multiplayer, but Extinction deserved more. This was basically zombies for COD Ghosts, but instead of zombies, it was aliens. Kind of. They're technically not aliens, there's some lore to it, but I would advise you play it for yourself to figure all that out. I actually played through all of Extinction, including the DLC maps about a year and a half ago, online if you can believe it. Apparently some people still play that mode. My first YouTube video was actually going to be a bit of a retrospective on Extinction, but I had like no editing skills back then and it was going to be a long video, so I decided to focus on shorter and simpler videos until I picked up some more editing skills. If COD Ghosts had maps up to the quality of its DLC, I think a lot more people would have liked it. But since that wasn't the case, before long into its life cycle, most of the Call of Duty Ghosts players went back to playing the next game I'll be talking about in this yapping session.
Shut up, clock in, and load up.
Call Call of Duty Black Ops 2. Now, I pretty much missed the prime of the 3 games before this one, but when it comes to Black Ops 2, I was there. Mostly because the prime of Black Ops 2 lasted like 3 years, which is why I still had plenty of time with this game, even though I didn't get into the multiplayer until well after Call of Duty Ghosts came out. The Call of Duty community pretty much stayed on Black Ops 2 until Black Ops 3 came out, because most of them didn't like Ghosts or Advanced Warfare. Now, up until this point, I put a decent amount of time into a couple COD multiplayers, but Black Ops 2 was the first game I made it to max prestige in, which takes a good while to reach. Part of that can be attributed to the fact that I was sharing my PlayStation 3 with one of my little brothers, and the online multiplayer in this game allowed us both to play at the same time using separate accounts on split screen. Remember when game devs were cool like that? But the multiplayer was undeniably fun. It was pretty fast-paced, didn't have an unbearable camping meta like the 2 games before it, and it had a pretty cool class system where you could basically min-max into whatever goofy playstyle you wanted. And if you want to get me hooked on an FPS game, you gotta have some playstyle variety. I also really like the emblem editor. I spent a lot of time making custom emblems for my guns to give them a more personal touch, and I wish more games kept doing stuff like this, because it's a great way to let you express yourself in-game. I can understand why they didn't keep this feature around though. Some of y'all motherfuckers don't know how to behave. The game definitely had its issues though. Target finder LMG campers, snipers basically being shotguns, the netcode was oftentimes straight dog shit, and there was an overall air of sweat to this game, since it had been out for a couple years and everyone was running the meta loadouts. Some of you who watch my contestant loadout series know that I kinda hate when games just turn into everyone using the same 2 or 3 loadouts, when the games have a lot more to offer. And because of that, I like to make off-meta loadouts that are fun. And all of that began in Black Ops 2. While everyone else ran around with lightweight, toughness, dexterity, AN-94 stock suppressor loadouts, my goofy ass was using the LSAT, RPG, flak jacket, scavenger, and as many explosives as I could get my hands on. This game basically started my habit of oftentimes playing goofy loadouts, which is still a thing I do to this day. But much like every other game, I eventually stopped playing this one too. This time it was my own fault though, because I broke the disc after my little brother tried installing some hacking software for Black Ops 2 onto our PlayStation, and he accidentally deleted my Skyrim save file with hundreds of hours on it. Was that a valid crash out? Let me know in the comments below. But breaking the disc didn't really matter to me, because at that point I was already well into the next FPS game that I ended up sinking a ton of hours into. I could honestly yap about how good Battlefield 4's multiplayer is for 3 hours straight, but this video is already going to be long enough, so here's the short version. Battlefield 4 is my favorite multiplayer first-person shooter of all time. Some people would say Battlefield 3 was better, but I missed that one, and as far as I can tell, 3 and 4 are pretty similar. Now, the game wasn't perfect, no game is, and it's definitely starting to show its age considering it's 12 years old. First off, the performance. I didn't start playing until about a year and a half after the game launched, so I missed the worst time in this game's life cycle. But even to this day, the game still has some problems with audio disappearing, server tick rate not being high enough, and the occasional crash.
Are you fucking serious?
It's far from unplayable, but it could be better. Also, for the most part, the DLC maps are way better than the base game maps. I remember reading somewhere that the launch maps were designed first and foremost to be more realistic, and then after they made the layout realistic, they added a bunch of stuff to make it a Battlefield map. But when it came to the DLC, they just made good Battlefield maps first and foremost, and it shows because damn near every DLC map is a banger. However, there's one big problem with this. Battlefield 4 is 12 years old, and the DLC is paid DLC. So these days, you might get lucky and find a server running DLC maps on the weekends, but most of those end up being hardcore servers, and listen homie, I ain't coming to Battlefield to play Milsim, okay? Anyways, my point is that the base game maps are serviceable, but the DLC maps are way better, and you can barely play the DLC maps these days because nobody is paying for multiplayer DLC for a 12-year-old game. I know that sounds pretty negative, but I'm only stuck up on this because Battlefield 4's expansions were fucking legendary. You got the Battlefield's Greatest Hits DLC, which modernized some of the best maps the Battlefield series has ever had, and brought back some fan-favorite weapons. There's Glory to the CCP, which added dirt bikes, and 3 great maps set in the beautiful lands of our glorious leader. I say 3 cause fuck Altai-Range. Then there's the beach episode, which IGN would probably give a 5 out of 10 for having too much water. but it has a special place in my heart because it's where I met my best Battlefield friend, and I'm also a former squid, so it gets bonus points there. All the maps were a great blend of naval and infantry combat, and Battlefield hasn't even come close to naval combat this good since this expansion released. Also, one of the maps had one of the best Easter eggs in any video game ever. If you got 10 people together in a specific area, a fucking megalodon would jump out of the water. After that, we had Dragon's Teeth. No funny name cause that name already goes hard as fuck. This was an Urban Warfare DLC, and a lot of people seem to hate this one, but I loved it. Now, I am biased because Urban Warfare maps are my favorite type when it comes to Battlefield, but even if you don't like the maps, you still had some dope-ass weapons come out of this DLC, and there was also the RAR. Last but certainly not least was Suka Blat, which saw the Americans fighting the Russians after they discovered that the Russians were making some crazy shit. People who played Battlefield 1942 might remember that one expansion that added crazy shit like jetpacks, and this is basically Battlefield 4's version of that. You had hover tanks, mech suits which unfortunately weren't playable, a giant sky carrier that was being built inside of a hangar that the Russians carved into a mountain, a drone shaped like a football that had a machine gun on it, and we absolutely cannot forget about the best weapon in the game, the railgun.
Oh, Chopper!
Oh shit!
Let's get him!
Boop, 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 bang! Yeah, baby!
Guys, calm down. No, that gun is definitely OP.
It's not OP. It's not OP.
It just took down a chopper.
Yeah, like a motherfucker.
This expansion was basically a prequel to Battlefield 2142, and I guess Battlefield 2042 technically, but we'll get to that one. Even without the DLC though, Battlefield 4 is absolutely packed with content. The reason this game has remained my favorite FPS to this day is because of the sheer amount of playstyles there are in this game. One game you can spend doing the usual run and gun, the next game you can spend as a chopper gunner, the game after that you can spend strapping C4 to a buggy and blowing up tanks, and the game after that you can spend throwing little recon planes into the air and killing people with them. And this is barely scratching the surface of how much range this game has. If you want an idea of how many goofy ass ways you can play this game, watch Martin Cedo-Pants's Battlefield 4 Tactics video. But even that video doesn't cover everything because there's just so many fun ways to play Battlefield 4. If you happen to see Battlefield 4 Premium on sale for $10 or less, I think it's worth picking up and trying out because unfortunately, the servers for this game might not be up around much longer, at least on consoles. Battlefield 4 kept me hooked for so long that I completely skipped Battlefield Hardline, and so did most of the community it seems. But that all changed on May 6, 2016 when I saw this. Battlefield 1 is the only Battlefield game with horses. Need I say more? In all seriousness, Battlefield 1 isn't my favorite Battlefield game, but it was absolutely the greatest game in terms of marketing. We'll get to the game in a bit, but I need to get off my chest just how good the marketing was. First off, the reveal trailer came out at the perfect time considering that 4 days before the Battlefield 1 reveal, Call of Duty shit the bed by announcing a space age game that the community was not happy about. I do feel kinda bad for Infinite Warfare looking back on it, cause it seems like it was actually a half-decent game, but back when Battlefield 1 got revealed, I was fully engaged in the Battlefield vs COD fight and roasting the hell out of Infinite Warfare. And EA wasn't oblivious about this. They knew exactly what was going on over in Call of Duty, and as a response, they released one of the greatest video game trailers of all time and basically told Call of Duty fans, hey, do you hate all that future fighting bullshit? Well, we got the exact opposite over here in Battlefield 1. Also, if you don't believe me when I say that the Battlefield 1 reveal was one of the greatest trailers of all time, this guy named Captain Peach put out a great video explaining just how influential this one trailer was for pretty much every FPS game going forward. The other trailers after this one were pretty good too. I'm a fairly reserved guy, but when I saw the part of the multiplayer trailer where the airship was falling down to the ground, and then it gets destroyed and basically becomes a part of the map, I was straight up soy-jacking like one of those fake reaction channels. Anyways, Battlefield 1's marketing was incredible, and it resulted in a lot of sales for EA, which is why so many people have fond memories of this game even if they weren't big Battlefield players before or after this game. But enough about the marketing for this game. How was the game itself? Pretty fucking good. It's not my favorite Battlefield, sorry, but Battlefield 4 is just that good. But Battlefield 1 is absolutely a great game. No game is perfect, so we'll start with what I hated. 1. Random bullet deviation. I'm not going to pretend to know exactly how this mechanic works, but it basically makes it to where a lot of your shots don't line up with where your sights are, and it makes some gunfights feel like pure luck. 2. Bomber planes. This being a World War I game, there wasn't a bunch of infantry running around with Stinger missiles or anything like that, so if there was a really good bomber pilot on the enemy team and your teammates didn't know how to fly, you basically had no choice but to sit there and take it. Yeah, there were some anti-air guns scattered around the map, but any bomber pilot worth a damn is gonna destroy those within like the first minute of the match. And speaking of explosive spam, 3. The grenade and explosive spam in this game is out of control. In most Battlefield games, this was kept to a minimum by making grenades and explosives take a bit to resupply from ammo crates. But in Battlefield 1, they resupply pretty fast and do a shit ton of damage, so oftentimes an enemy will throw a grenade at you before they even try to shoot you. And because this is a World War I game, there's not exactly an APS or a flak jacket you can equip to help you out. Alright, back to glazing this game. First off, this game is probably the most immersive shooter I have ever played. I know that saying a game really makes you feel like a certain person is kind of a meme, but even though this game isn't the most realistic or factually correct, you can tell the developers paid a lot of attention to detail when it came to the weapons, environment, sound design, uniforms, and pretty much everything else to really make you feel like a soldier in the First World War. It manages to feel authentic and respectful to the people who fought in the First World War, while also not being the most realistic, and it straight up feels like a World War I action movie sometimes. I'm gonna put some gameplay with no commentary up real quick, and just tell me this doesn't feel like a World War I soldier with a body cam.
Assaltatore nemico, facciamo attenzione! Medico nemico, là!
I don't know how to describe the immersion any better than that, so hopefully that makes sense. Also, this game is where I realized just how much a good soundtrack can contribute to the feel of a game, which is why I always make sure to shout out great soundtracks when I review games. If you don't believe me, play a round of operations as the attackers on Suez Canal take a sector, and then wait for Nothing Is Written to start playing, and tell me you're not creaming your pants as you push towards the enemy.
We have secured the sector.
This game is still relatively active, and on weekends it's usually not too hard to find a match. At least in the base game maps. I don't know what the situation is like when it comes to the DLC. If the DLC is dead, then that would be a shame because Battlefield 1 was another great run of DLC. First off, we had Put Some Motherfucking Respect on France's Name, which single-handedly made me stop making French jokes for about 5 days. Suka Blayat World War I edition, which showed us what the Russian front of World War I was like, and I believe this was the first time female soldiers were playable in Battlefield. It made sense for this expansion if you look into DICE's reasoning for it, but I think some people at DICE got a little bit too emboldened by this.
Hello, old friend.
We'll talk about that soon. Then we had Turning Tides, which released around the same time dumbass people on the internet were trying to turn Tide Pods into an afternoon snack for clout. This was basically Naval Strike for Battlefield 1, and it gave us a few naval combat maps which the base game was kind of lacking in. And finally, there's Apocalypse, which had the toughest trailer out of all the DLCs, and the vibes from this trailer were reflected in-game. I mentioned that playing Battlefield 1 feels like an action movie set in World War I, but the color grading, environmental design, and music for Apocalypse sort of pulls you back in and reminds you that World War I was fucking brutal, man. If you never got to experience the DLC, once again, I think it's worth picking up if you find it on sale, and I'm pretty sure eventually you'll be able to find some servers running the maps. To be honest, and yes, I know this is a pipe dream, but EA should just make the expansions free for all of the older Battlefield games. They probably wouldn't be losing much money, and considering what the two games after Battlefield 1 were like, they're gonna need all the goodwill they can get if they want people to buy the next one. Battlefield 1 was a fucking banger, and in my opinion, the last truly amazing Battlefield game. But once again, we'll get to that. But since the last two games we talked about were Battlefield, let's take a quick detour to talk about another game that I played before the next one released. Alright, I'm gonna confess right now that Overwatch never became my main FPS game, but I did play a decent amount of it back in 2018, so I feel it's worth talking about for a bit. I don't think Overwatch needs much of an introduction, whether it's through the game that exploded in popularity and took over the gaming world, or some of the other Overwatch projects that exploded in popularity. Everyone knows about this game. This game pretty much kicked off the hero shooter trend that's still kind of going on to this day. You figured that about 8 years later, people would realize it's time to stop making hero shooters, but I guess Concord never got the fucking memo. To be honest, I never had huge issues with Overwatch, probably because I was playing it alongside Battlefield 4 and Battlefield 1 in a rotation of sorts, so I never really got into the meta and understood what was overpowered or what was trash, yada yada yada. I guess my biggest complaint at the time would have probably been the player base. And don't get me wrong, I started off in Black Ops 1 and Modern Warfare 2 lobbies. I'm not clutching my pearls over being called a bad word here and there. But some of y'all would just hop on the mic over the dumbest shit.
Bro, switch off of the hero, they suck. Bro, why are you playing DPS? We need a tank. Dude, let me play Widowmaker or I'm leaving the match. Bro, you just used your ult and only got 2 kills.
Keep in mind, I never played ranked, so all of this yapping was always in a regular pub match. If you don't like how I'm playing, that's fine. I get tilted by bad teammates too. But if it's not ranked and you're not getting on the mic to give me some actual good advice, keep that shit to yourself, homie. But what I did like about Overwatch was the art and graphic design. This was the first FPS game I played that wasn't trying to be some gritty looking military shooter. It was going for a more cartoonish vibe, while still having character designs realistic enough to make them relatable, and make it to where you could get a vibe for what the heroes do just by looking at them. I also liked the hero gameplay itself, obviously, or I wouldn't have played it as much as I did. For me, it was a pretty new concept, and I liked that every hero felt pretty unique from one another gameplay-wise. You could spend hours upon hours learning the nuances of each one, but since I was pretty casual with Overwatch, I mostly played Mercy, Sombra, and Orisa, or however the hell you say her name, depending on what my team needed. But while I was happy to fill in what was missing on the team, apparently not enough people were, because Blizzard started forcing people to role queue into specific roles in the casual modes. Now listen, I don't mind if developers have strict rules for ranked, but something I absolutely hate is when developers come into casual modes and say, "You filthy casuals aren't having fun the way we approved of, so we're gonna fuck your shit up." I think this is where Overwatch really started to fall off for a lot of people, and it got progressively worse until Blizzard just straight up fucking deleted Overwatch when they released Overwatch 2. I've never played Overwatch 2 and I refuse to, which is why none of the gameplay in this Overwatch section of the video is mine. All the discourse around that game seems pretty negative, and I just don't like Blizzard as a company anymore.
Do you guys not have phones?
Yeah, you guys all have phones, right?
And a lot of people seem to agree, considering Marvel Rivals has been eating Overwatch's lunch lately. But don't worry, while Blizzard may have taken away the golden age of Overwatch, the co-op campaign they promised but never delivered, and the titty milk from their employees, they'll never take away the memories we made, the friends we met, and the titties we animated. Like I said, Overwatch was never my main game, but it definitely broadened my FPS game horizon beyond the typical realistic-looking military shooters, and if it wasn't for Overwatch, I probably wouldn't have given games like the finals a chance. Hell, I even made some Overwatch-inspired loadouts in the finals, which you can check out in my contestant loadout series, so needless to say, despite never being absolutely enthralled by this game, Overwatch definitely shaped my outlook for FPS games going forward. It's unfortunate that Overwatch has seemingly been stuck in a decline lately, at least from my perspective as a former casual player. But if you think that the Overwatch fall off is bad, just wait until we start talking about the next FPS game I played. You guys know how I was glazing Battlefield 1 for its marketing? Imagine for a second that they fired that marketing team and hired a bunch of people who've never even played Battlefield to market the next one. Look, we'll get to the game in a bit, but I just got to rant about how horrible Battlefield 5's reveal was. Instead of coming out with a short speech before one of the greatest reveals of all time, they brought on fucking Trevor Noah to present this game. Cause surely a guy who hosts a political talk show is who you want presenting your Battlefield game. Then there was like a 30-minute reveal panel that gave the vibe of a bunch of kids in high school from completely different social circles trying to work on a group project together. But hey, this is all just fluff being forced on them by EA. All that matters is the reveal trailer, and surely the trailer will be amazing, right?
Hello, old friend.
Look, I'm not getting into a debate about historical accuracy. If you think there was a bunch of women with prosthetic arms storming houses and killing Germans by the dozens in World War II, you're just an idiot and I can't help you. The guys at DICE clearly wanted women in Battlefield games, which is fine, even for a World War II game, as there's plenty of badass women in World War II you can pull inspiration from. But whereas Battlefield 1 used it as a way to pay tribute to a pretty cool unit of female snipers, Battlefield 5 was just going way too off the rails. Combine this with the weird-ass skins for vehicles, this guy fighting in Western Europe with a samurai sword on his back, and now this World War II game looks like fucking Fortnite. So the marketing stumbled out of the gate, then one of the geniuses working at EA or DICE, I don't know specifically where he worked, but this dumbass basically called fans with concerns for historical authenticity uneducated and told them to not buy the game if they didn't like it. That is the single worst thing you can do when faced with criticism. So even though the later trailers and reveals were pretty good, a lot of people wrote off the game. Once again, Captain Peach has a pretty good video on this, so make sure to check that out. Battlefield 5 released in November 2018 and it basically went unnoticed. Nobody was talking about this game when it came out, and it's probably a good thing because it was unfinished. Not as bad as some other Battlefield games, but there was bugs fucking everywhere. The first content update was clearly just cut out from the base game to make it look like they were going to add a shit ton of content during their live service, and after that first big content drop, we got basically nothing for like 5 or 6 months. One of the reasons the base game was so lackluster was because EA saw all the money that Battle Royale games were making, and they wanted to put one in Battlefield 5. So precious resources that could have been used to make 2 or 3 more maps for the base game were used to make a Battle Royale called Firestorm, and this shit fell off instantly. 1, because Battlefield players don't give a shit about Battle Royale, and 2, this small indie Battle Royale game you might have heard of called Apex Legends released like 2 or 3 weeks before Firestorm for free. This shit was worse timing than when the first 2 Horizon games came out right before Breath of the Wild and Elden Ring. By the way, I still plan on reviewing Shadow of the Erd Tree in the near future, so subscribe if you want to see that. Anyways, Battlefield 5 was absolutely cooked content-wise until they released the DLC for the Pacific Theater of World War II, and finally added some World War II battles people gave a shit about. But unfortunately, it was too little too late, and less than 1 year after this DLC released, the game was taken over to the local Planned Parenthood and, well, let's just say EA didn't have to worry about paying child support anymore. Yep, that was the end of Battlefield 5. We got a bunch of content containing battles nobody knew or cared about, and right when we were finally making a comeback, the game was thrown into the trash bin. What an absolute waste of potential. Seriously, imagine how much better this game would have been if it launched with maps like Stalingrad, Normandy, Iwo Jima, and the Battle of the Bulge. To be fair to the developers, they were trying to follow World War II chronologically when it came to the content drops, and most of the well-known battles didn't happen until later on in the war. But they needed way better marketing to make that happen, and we already talked about that, so let's just move on to the game itself. After all the shit I talked, you're probably assuming I jumped ship on Battlefield 5 pretty quick, but no, I played the shit out of this game. My patience for Battlefield was at an all-time high because of how good Battlefield 4 and 1 were, so even though the launch date of the game wasn't amazing, I stuck through it. Yeah, there were some problems for sure. Visibility fucking sucked, the game encouraged players to camp in bushes or dark corners with MG42s, and there was this one map called Fiel 652, but it should have been called Fiel 666 because only the devil would create a map this fucking bad. You remember how I mentioned you get bombed a lot in Battlefield 1? Imagine an entire map where that's basically all that happens. This shit was terrible. But the game still had a lot going for it. The gunplay was smooth, the sound design and soundtrack were great, and they added a couple cool systems in the game like attrition, which might be a bit divisive because it made it to where you needed to resupply on ammo and meds all the time, but I like that it rewarded teamwork and staying near your squad. Also, the fortification system was pretty cool. This wasn't like Fortnite where you could just build cover wherever you wanted, but it was pretty cool to go up to a destroyed house and still be able to build some cover and use it again, or dig a trench with sandbags when you got stuck out in an open area. And finally, the game had a great movement system. A lot of people are hyping up Omni movement in Black Ops 6, but Battlefield 5 basically had that 6 years before Black Ops 6. I'm not sure why they didn't bring it back for 2042, but we'll talk about that game eventually. Overall, the gameplay of Battlefield 5 at its core was perfectly fine, if a bit janky at launch, but the marketing and subsequent lack of any big content drops pretty much killed this game before it even launched, and it's a real shame. Battlefield 5 remained my go-to first-person shooter for a while, but the way EA treated it got me to start looking into other franchises more seriously, and one of the games I discovered around this time was To be honest, I wasn't even gonna give Black Ops 3 its own section in the video until I looked at my profile on the game the other day, and I saw that I put a decent amount of time into it. Black Ops 3 is far from the greatest Call of Duty, but I think it was good overall. It did the whole wall-running future Call of Duty thing better than Advanced Warfare or Infinite Warfare. And while I've gotten pretty tired of the whole specialist system in modern-day shooters, back in 2015 it was a pretty good addition for Call of Duty. My favorite specialist was this one guy named Nomad who had this weapon called the Hive Launcher. You could use this to place some drone clusters around the map and anyone who walked by them would get torn into pieces, and considering this game had gore, it was pretty brutal. There were some other pretty cool specialists like Reaper the robot with a minigun and Ruin who could slam down on the ground with gravity spikes and kill anyone nearby. Black Ops 3 was also the first Call of Duty with a gunsmith system you could use to really trick out your guns to look and play how you wanted them to, and you could even make your own special paint jobs for them. It's not as in-depth as it is in some of the later Call of Duty games, but it's a good first iteration. Overall, from my perspective as a casual player, the multiplayer was pretty solid. Apart from one thing, these goddamn supply crates. In Call of Duty Advanced Warfare's multiplayer, you could unlock supply crates which would give you variants of weapons and later on, entirely new weapons. This was basically combining two of the most hated monetization forms in gaming, pay-to-win weapons and loot boxes. Fast forward to Black Ops 3, and the developers gave us the mostest, biggest, super-duper pinky promise that their supply crates were purely cosmetic, and they would never end there's a melee weapon in the supply crates. Okay, but it's just a melee weapon. That's basically like one step away from being a cosmetic and there's a submachine gun in the supply crates. Now I knew they were full of shit when they promised not to put weapons in supply crates because even though the entire Call of Duty community hated this shit, y'all were still buying them. Keep in mind, this was a full price game with a season pass. The fact this didn't cause as big of a shitstorm as Battlefront 2 did is honestly astonishing to me. And while Call of Duty eventually stopped putting loot boxes in the games, I think Black Ops 3 is where the microtransactions in Call of Duty started to get out of control, but we'll discuss that in more detail later on. That's really all I have to say about Black Ops 3 though. I didn't play it anywhere near as much as Black Ops 2, and I only really downloaded it because PlayStation gave it out for free a little bit after Black Ops 4 came out. And no, I didn't play Black Ops 4, but I did play Black Ops 3 opened my mind to playing Call of Duty again, but I wasn't really invested in another Call of Duty game until Modern Warfare 2019. And to be honest, even that might not have happened if it wasn't for the unspecified virus of unknown origin that hit the world in 2020. Modern Warfare wasn't my main quarantine game. We'll talk about that one in a little bit. But my friends played a lot of Warzone, so I got a copy of the game so I could play with them. Now aside from another game we'll talk about later, I don't even like Battle Royales. But seeing as this was the only way I could hang out with my friends at the time, I jumped on it. Activision honestly struck gold releasing this game when they did. I'm sure it would have been successful no matter what since it was free to play, but the fact that millions of people around the world had literally nothing else to do when Warzone released made it to where even a lot of the older people with kids had time to play this game. Case in point, some of my bosses from my job at the time were even hopping on to play with me and my friends. And I feel pretty bad about this, but since they were married guys with kids, they weren't exactly pub stomping. So anytime me and my friends were dead and spectating our bosses, we would just sit in a separate voice chat roasting the fuck out of them.
This nigga is trash!
Sorry about that if any of you guys happen to be watching. Warzone was pretty cool at launch though. You dropped in with a pistol, then after you got enough money, you could call in a crate with a custom loadout, and the XP you earned for guns carried across multiplayer and Warzone, so you could play the normal multiplayer to level up your guns, then use those guns in Warzone or vice versa. The buying stations were also a pretty cool way of incorporating kill streaks into Warzone. Instead of earning kill streaks by camping like a backline bitch, you had to move around and loot a bunch of money, or kill some players and take their money. All pretty good stuff, but unfortunately Activision saw the big bucks they made on Warzone during the great coup of 2020, and they decided they wanted Warzone to be the priority for Call of Duty going forward. This resulted in the core multiplayer of pretty much every Call of Duty after Modern Warfare becoming an afterthought, and the microtransactions that come with Warzone took Modern Warfare from looking like a military shooter to fucking Fortnite. I don't mind goofy skins in games, but only if they fit the tone of the game. The reason Ariana Grande or the Doomslayer aren't out of place in Fortnite is because Fortnite has always had an air of goofiness to it. But when you put Nicki Minaj and whatever the fuck this bunny thing is supposed to be in a shooter that has a fairly serious tone, it just pulls me out of it, and I'm sure a lot of other people would agree. But unfortunately, COD players keep buying this shit, and then they have the audacity to turn around and complain about these skins. Like, bro, let me see your credit card statement real quick. Anyways, I played a decent amount of Modern Warfare during the pandemic nonetheless, but there was a couple other PvP games I played even more. The first one being Alright, first off, Doom Eternal was Game of the Year 2020. Go fuck yourself, Jeff. I didn't play Battlemode as much as I played the Doom Eternal campaign itself, but I still played a good amount of it since I had time to kill. Doom Eternal was another one of those big games that got lucky and came out right when the lockdown started, the other two being Animal Crossing and Warzone. Battlemode is probably the most unique shooter I've put a decent amount of time into. It's asymmetrical in its balance. Instead of the usual team versus team with the same guns you see in most FPS games, this mode pitched one player as the Slayer versus two player-controlled demons. The premise is simple: kill the two player demons if you're the Slayer, and kill the Slayer if you're the demons. Considering it's an asymmetrical game mode, I think it's balanced pretty good. Now, I wasn't the biggest battle mode gamer in the world, so I don't know the balancing nuances or the meta, but when I was playing as the Slayer, I never felt like I stood zero chance of winning, and I never felt like the demons were too weak when I was playing as them. There were several types of demons you could play as, all with their own abilities and playstyles, and in between rounds, both the Slayer and demons could pick some upgrades to make themselves stronger. If you played as a demon, your goal was basically to use your abilities and summons to wear down and outsmart the Slayer, as he could typically outdamage you. But when you played as the Slayer, your best bet was to play aggressive and kill both the player demons as quickly as possible, especially since the player demons could respawn after a little while, so long as their partner stayed alive. Aside from the game being kind of laggy at tracking players, I can't really think of any big negatives for this mode. If this mode launched with more maps, or if Doom Eternal had more multiplayer modes in general, I'm sure I would have played a lot more than I did. But Doom Eternal's focus overall was the single player, and I can respect that because the Doom Eternal campaign is a 10 out of 10. But when it came to multiplayer games in 2020, there's one game that was my undisputed quarantine game. Alright, two things. One, I know that Rainbow Six Siege has kind of fallen off in recent times, which is why the intro screen is from the season I started playing. And two, that was a lie. My first time playing Siege was actually during Operation White Noise. For a couple of years, Siege was one of those games I would hop into here and there to see what was going on, play for a couple days, then go back to my main FPS game. But much like the past couple of games, due to the Scourge virus of 2020, I had some extra time, and one day I decided, let's put some time in to really learn how to play Siege properly. Now, if you want to get me hooked on a first-person shooter, you need two things: depth and playstyle variety. And while the Siege developers have been doing their best to kill playstyle variety in recent times, the game still has and will always have a lot of depth to it. I don't really care much for tactical shooters, but the way Siege did it really clicked with me. The matches are organized into two phases: the preparation phase, which you can use to make a plan of attack or set up your defenses, and the action phase, where you watch whatever plan you had quickly fall apart. Then there's the operator system, which gives every character their own unique ability and brings that playstyle variety and depth I mentioned earlier. You got operators that blow shit up, operators that bamboozle you, operators that say fuck you to headshots, at least until the current season, and operators that don't need any of that fancy schmancy military equipment because breaking your opponent's legs with a bear trap is good enough. It's a tactical shooter, which would usually make it a pretty simple game, but the operator system and destructible environments give it a lot more depth than something like CSGO or Search and Destroy in Call of Duty. I've played hundreds of hours of Siege and I still feel lost a lot of the time. Some of that is for bad reasons, but we'll get into that when I'm done glazing the game, which is right around here. Funnily enough, Operation Shadow Legacy saw the release of Zero, who's actually Sam Fisher from Splinter Cell, and still my favorite attacking operator to this day. But it's also when Siege started to fall off for me. The developers started putting out one operator a season instead of two, which I didn't have a problem with at first, especially since they promised this would mean the operators were more unique, and this would allow them to shift focus to making some core gameplay reworks and other types of content. Here's the problem with this promise. The execution was fucking terrible. The core gameplay reworks were things that really didn't seem like they were worth the cost of one less operator per season. The operators were still reusing weapons that were already in the game. They took like 2 years after this season to put one new map in the game, even though the game hadn't gotten a new map in over a year at this point. So it really took 3 years for a new Siege map to come out. No, map reworks don't fucking count as new maps, and I don't care that the game was several years old. Rainbow Six Siege was getting more content when it was making way less money for Ubisoft than it is right now, so the lack of content is inexcusable. But speaking of making money, that's basically the only thing Siege exists for today. It's one big fucking store with a tactical shooter attached to it. I wouldn't even mind the amount of cosmetic microtransactions in the game if there was a feasible way to at least earn some of the skins you wanted, but you have to buy them with renown, and the amount of renown you get per match is pathetic. Even when you win, the game only gives you like 500. And by the way, the actual operators are also bought with renown and they cost 25,000. So which one do you think most people are gonna buy? And no, alpha packs are not a substitute for earning cosmetics. For those of you who don't know, alpha packs are basically loot boxes for skins, and you get like 1 every 15 matches if you're lucky, and only about 1 in every 20 alpha packs contains a skin that doesn't make you want to throw up. And that's if you don't end up getting a duplicate skin. By the way, this game also has a paid battle pass, paid cosmetics and limited time events, loot boxes for limited time events, cosmetics you can only buy with money, and it's not even free to play. Literally every way they can monetize this game has been implemented. They even started doing collaborations with some TV shows, so now you got fucking Rick and Morty running around in a game that started off as a fairly serious SWAT shooter. The futuristic gadgets are one thing, but shit like this just takes me out of it. Like, dude, they Call of Duty'd my Rainbow Six Siege. And oh, I almost forgot to mention that you can also buy operators with real money. So if they release a busted operator, the game is basically pay to win until they balance the operator, which takes them fucking forever to do. There's an operator named Solace that took them like a year and a half to bring in line with the other ones. They were presenting the Solace nerf at the 6 Invitationals like it was some huge piece of content, which at this point it basically is. Since Siege puts out like 0 content these days, all of these buffs and nerfs for the operators are the content now. And to make matters worse, it's not even good buffs and nerfs. This guy named Spades has a couple good videos on this, but the Rainbow Six Siege developers have basically been fighting their own community when it comes to balancing this game. This is because the only thing they use to balance this game is this stupid fucking spreadsheet that I would burn with a lighter if it was an actual sheet of paper. Oh, players like playing this operator? Nerf. Oh, now they're playing this operator? Nerf. Hey, how about we look at the ones that aren't getting picked and maybe do something about that?
Fucking goddamn fucking bitch!
All of this stuff I ranted about is basically how Siege pushed me out of the game. It didn't happen overnight, but the more Ubisoft kept doing shit like this, the more I checked out. When I recorded the Siege gameplay for this video, that was the first time I played Siege in several months. At this point, I'm playing even less than I did back in 2018 when I would only play like a dozen or so matches each season. I don't think Siege was going to be my main FPS game forever, but I think it could have at least been one that I could always rely on for a good time if they didn't fuck it up like they did. Hey everyone, this is Editing Hyperborean, and I just want to address a couple points that I know Siege players watching this video might bring up. This info came out after I wrote the script for this video, so let's just address it real quick. 1. I know the developers recently promised that every new operator coming out will have at least 1 new gun, and while I'm glad that's happening, that still means they're recycling 2 or 3 weapons a season. And considering they've been recycling weapons and putting out 1 new operator a season for like 5 years now, I would say 1 new gun every season is still less than the bare minimum. And 2, the developers recently announced Rainbow Six Siege X, which to my understanding is a giant overhaul to the game as a whole. And that sounds great considering Siege has a lot of technical issues that are probably the result of the current engine it runs on. But I'm gonna need to see how significant of an update this is before I cream my pants over it. Rainbow Six Siege is still a game I can see myself playing from time to time, even if it's a lot less than I did before. But that's only because it doesn't really have a competitor. If any other half-competent developer put out a decent game that was a direct competitor to Rainbow Six Siege, I don't think it would be anywhere near as popular as it still is. Basically, the whole game is carried by the fact that Rainbow Six Siege has a monopoly on the type of gameplay you get in Rainbow Six Siege. If you want proof of this, just look at how people are treating Overwatch after Marvel Rivals showed up on the scene. Anyways, back to the video. I'm sorry I ranted so much in this section of the video. Siege just has a special place in my heart because it was my quarantine game, and I really enjoyed it back then, even though my teammates would always vote to kick me for not clutching a 1v5. There's one good thing they did, I guess, taking that shit out of the game. But seeing as I all but dropped Siege eventually, what game did I replace it with? You guys remember how I said there was only one Battle Royale game I actually liked? That was Apex Legends. Apex Legends released about 2 years before I really got into it, and I did play a bit at launch, but it didn't really click with me at that point, and Battlefield 5 was still my go-to game. But with Battlefield 5 being abandoned behind a Taco Bell dumpster and Rainbow Six Siege doing its best to become the dumpster, I started looking for another FPS game to sink time into. Then one day I saw a video talking about what the new content for Apex Legends Season 8 was, and I thought to myself, damn, that game is still going? Much like Siege, the developers stuck through the slump after the game launched, kept pumping it with quality content, and the game was experiencing a bit of a comeback around Season 8. Maybe it started sooner, I don't know, but that's when I got hooked on Apex personally, and it stayed that way for most of 2021. Apex Legends is a battle royale set in the Titanfall universe, and it basically took hero shooters and combined them with battle royales. Much like Overwatch or Valorant, every character has their own unique abilities ranging from wall hacks, to teleportation, to grappling hooks, to having a gat that hypnotizes everyone in the arena.
How about that prick's face when he saw the gat?
It was also pretty fast-paced despite being a battle royale thanks to some balancing changes the developers put in to encourage pushing instead of camping. Not that camping wasn't a viable playstyle, but it certainly never felt like you were punished for being aggressive. So even though it was a battle royale, I still got hooked on it because it was fast-paced, which was a nice change of pace from Siege. It had gunplay that was simple but felt good, and I was used to one life modes already because I'd been playing Siege for so long. And unlike Siege, I could actually earn cosmetics I wanted through the crafting system and unlock the legends with a separate currency. Holy shit, what a crazy concept, Ubisoft. That's not to say that the monetization was perfect. There's these things called heirlooms in the game that are basically $300 melee skins, not to mention the paid battle pass and store that's already in the game. But I could tolerate it because this was a free-to-play game, and the art style and the fact that canonically this is one big game show made it to where none of the cosmetics took me out of the game like fucking Rick and Morty and Rainbow Six Siege did. Anyways, I played a ton of Apex during Season 8 and 10. I skipped Season 9 because I wasn't able to play for about 4 months, and during Season 9, they added a mode called Arenas, which is why I really saw the potential in Apex. The gunplay movement and legend abilities in Apex Legends were balanced around a battle royale, but they lended themselves well to an arena shooter as well. And I was hoping that Respawn would add more game modes soon, because I hate when a good game like this is wasted on one game mode. They did add more game modes eventually, like Team Deathmatch, Gun Game, a King of the Hill style mode, and a Domination style mode too. And to their credit, I think these modes play well from what I played when I recorded gameplay for this video. But if you look at the time left in the video, you can tell Apex isn't my current or final FPS game. So why did I leave Apex? Well, Apex seems to be falling apart lately. First off, the monetization has gotten so much worse, even for a free-to-play game. Instead of adding better content for each season, they added another battle pass per season. So now players are getting less content and more monetization, and the developers seem to not give a shit about the state of their game. Also, I don't know the nuances of the balancing, but when I played to record gameplay for this video, I noticed that the Kraber doesn't one-shot headshot people anymore. What the fuck? That was literally the Kraber's whole thing. So it seems like the balancing is going in a direction I don't care for either. However, these are all recent issues, and I didn't have any serious problems with the game when I stopped playing back in 2021. I was just waiting for them to put some more game modes in besides Battle Royale because I was getting burnt out on that. But by the time they did put those modes out, it was too late because the next game I put some serious time into was about to launch. Alright, first off, Battlefield 2042 wasn't the game I left Apex for. That was the plan at first, but it didn't pan out. We'll get into why. You guys know how I shit on Battlefield 5's marketing for being trash? Well, Battlefield 2042 was the opposite of that. First off, the reveal trailer was literally everything Battlefield fans wanted. It was a near-future setting with some cool-looking vehicles and soldiers that fit the setting, badass music, and even a guy ejecting from his jet to shoot down another one, then get back into his jet, which was basically the Battlefield community's version of a trick shot. Then the multiplayer trailers came out and they all looked pretty good, and they even revealed a mode that was basically gonna be a Battlefield sandbox called Battlefield Portal, where you could mix and match a bunch of the content from some of the Battlefield games, as well as Battlefield 2042, and make your own custom games out of it. All of this looked great, and I'm ashamed to admit this, but this marketing worked on me, and I pre-ordered the Ultimate Edition of Battlefield 2042. I learned a very important lesson that year. Because underneath the fancy marketing for this game, there were some problems starting to rear their heads. The closed playtest barely seemed functional, the game was abandoning classes in favor of specialists, and the information on the game seemed scarce, like they didn't want to reveal anything before the beta. I saw this as the developers trying to leave a lot for the players to discover, but once the beta came out, it was pretty obvious that the game was not ready for launch. Don't worry though, the game is delayed by 1 month and the beta build is months old. Surely it'll launch fine. Right?
I'm sorry, I don't play video games that lie to me, you know? I mean, I just don't participate in that.
Battlefield 2042's launch was when my patience for Battlefield as a franchise ran out. There were bugs up the ass, the map design was fucking terrible, the specialist system made teamwork a thing of the past because anyone could use any gun and gadget they wanted, and you couldn't even go to Battlefield Portal to try and make a more class-based shooter because there was no way to earn XP in that mode. As soon as the game launched, the community set up a bunch of bot XP farms on Battlefield Portal, and DICE shut that down basically on site. So now even if you wanted to run a match with some loadout restrictions like the old games, but nothing too crazy besides that, it was pointless because you would get no unlocks from it. And even though I understand why they shut down Portal XP, I think leaving it in would have been the least they could do to make up for the launch date of the game. But no, shut down Portal XP and say your players have brutal expectations when they ask for a game that works instead, I guess. Couple all of that with the horrendous balancing at launch, like the hovercrafts that were basically tanks that could drive up skyscrapers, the PP-29 SMG being a better assault rifle than the assault rifles, and both of the quote-unquote transport helicopters basically being AC-130s, and I just tapped out. Battlefield 2042 at launch was a fucking abysmal embarrassment, and because of the fact that Battlefield 5 was abandoned at its peak just for the next one to come out like this, the whole franchise is on life support. If the next Battlefield game is anything less than a certified banger, I think Battlefield as a series is done, like genuinely. EA will 100% abandon this series if the next game isn't a huge moneymaker. But don't worry, they'll make that money back from all of you Apex Legends players. So since I tapped out of Battlefield 2042, what did I replace it with? Was it Apex Legends? No, it wasn't even a PvP game at all. Alright, I know this video is about PvP first-person shooters, so I'm going to keep this section of the video a little bit more brief. I picked up Deep Rock Galactic around the beginning of 2022 when it released as a free PlayStation Plus game, and to be honest, I don't know what made me want to actually play it. Usually I claim the free games, then I don't touch them for 5 years, but after Battlefield 2042's terrible launch, I was looking for a bit of a AAA FPS palate cleanser, so I figured fuck it, let's try out the indie FPS. And I'm glad I did, cause forget the FPS genre for a second. Deep Rock Galactic is one of my top 10 games of all time. If it wasn't for Deep Rock Galactic, I probably would have rotated back to Apex Legends, but the game just hooked me. Being a short king myself, I love that you play as a dwarf, and the dwarves just ooze personality with the way they talk about how much this job sucks and talk shit to each other. And you remember what I said about Siege and how to get me hooked on an FPS game? You need playstyle variety and depth. This game has 4 distinct playstyles through the 4 classes you can play as, and since there's several mission types, several biome types, a bunch of different weapon upgrades, and everything from mission events to the cave layouts to mini bosses can be randomly generated, there's a lot to learn, which means there's a lot of depth to this game. But this game also has a couple more things that most FPS games with playstyle variety and depth don't have. A great community and great customization. There's so many ways you can trick out your dwarf, and guess what? You earn all of this by playing the game. There's some paid cosmetics to support the game more long term, but even those are worth the price in my opinion. And these paid cosmetics support the free DLC they put out for this game. Like I said though, this video is about the PvP game, so let's get back to that. Deep Rock Galactic became my go-to first-person shooter for most of 2022, despite not being PvP at all, and I still play it to this day. But eventually I did start looking around for another PvP first-person shooter to sink my time into as my main multiplayer game. And around this time, I saw a game on sale that I always wanted to try out. This is going to be another brief section because I haven't really played that much Insurgency. I got it because it was on sale and I knew going into it that it was a pretty hardcore game. Usually this drives me away from a game, but I figured I'd keep trying new things after I struck gold with Deep Rock Galactic. Unfortunately, while Apex Legends was able to get me to like a battle royale game, Insurgency didn't really get me into milsim shooters. I don't think the game is bad by any means. I actually really like the co-op mode, and I think the soldier and loadout customization in this game is great. But the PvP portion of this game doesn't really click with me. It's very punishing because it's milsim, and while I never felt like I couldn't adapt and get good at the game, I think I was looking for something a bit more fast-paced. I know people are going to say, well, you were into Siege at one point, and that's obviously a punishing and slower-paced game. But Siege also has a lot of playstyle variety and depth to it. You know, those two things I need to get hooked on an FPS, and to me, it didn't feel like Insurgency had those. Now don't torch me at the stake if you play Insurgency and know the full depth of the game, okay? I only played like 20 hours. But I don't think Insurgency is trying to appeal to me, and that's fine. It's trying to appeal to people who enjoyed the ultra-realistic military shooters, and it does a great job in this regard. Even though it ultimately wasn't my cup of tea, I still had a bunch of matches where I was fully immersed in having fun, giving out comms to the locations of enemy snipers, laying down suppressive fire so my teammates could move, escorting our radio man to the commander so they could call in a chopper reinforcement. There's definitely some fun times to be had here and there, and I'm sure I'll continue to play it every once in a while when I get that itch for a realistic shooter. However, there was a modern shooter that was designed for a more casual audience releasing pretty soon. I enjoyed Modern Warfare 2019 enough to pick up a copy of Modern Warfare 2 when it came out. I also liked what I was seeing when it came to the multiplayer. They were trying to slow things down a bit while still having some of the usual run and gun gameplay that Call of Duty was known for. Yeah, I know a lot of people in the Call of Duty community consider Modern Warfare 2022 to be one of the campiest games of all time, but that's because they're comparing it to other Call of Duty games. In the grand scheme of FPS games, Modern Warfare 2022 is still a pretty fast-paced game. Now, all that being said, I never committed hard to this game like I did with some of the other games I've talked about in this video. I definitely put a decent amount of time into it though, mostly because at this point I still didn't really have a go-to FPS game. But there were some genuinely good things about this game. The gunplay was still pretty good, I liked the campaign, and the weapon customization and multiplayer is still some of the best in the industry in my opinion. For a little while, I had some fun just turning off my brain and running around with my MP7, jumping around corners like I was some action movie soldier, and when I felt like doing a little trolling, I picked up a shotgun and camped in rooms with every explosive trap I could get my hands on.
Saucy, where you at, you little scrublet? Yeah, dominated, crusty peach.
Also, if you like the tactical dude bro military aesthetic like I do, this game does a great job of giving you just that through its presentation. Or at least, it did when the game launched. This is where we get into the negatives. First off, Activision likes to do this whole thing where they launch a Call of Duty that has a somewhat realistic military aesthetic. Whether it's World War II, the Cold War, or Modern Warfare, at launch the multiplayer looks like a military shooter, but give it a few months and here comes the fucking Easter Bunny and Homelander. I've said it once and I'll say it again. I'm not opposed to goofy skins if they fit the vibe of the game, but you can't launch a game as an authentic looking military shooter, then not expect me to give you a look of disappointment when you throw in Chuck E. Cheese's uncle geeked out of his mind on fentanyl. Also, I don't usually care too much about the UI in video games, but what the fuck are these menus? Why do they look like the home screen for a streaming service? Oh, it's because they hired some guy who worked on the UI for a streaming service to make this game's UI. So now the menus look like shit and they take forever to load. Also, the weapon customization in this game is still great, but the progression, not so much. The game had this receiver system where you would level up different types of guns using similar receivers to unlock attachments. This could have been a cool concept if the progression leveled entirely off of the receiver, but instead it was this weird mixed system where you basically had to do shit like use an SMG to unlock a scope for your sniper rifle. Want to unlock a foregrip for your LMG? Then you need to level up this other assault rifle you have no interest in. I think this was meant to encourage people to use different types of weapons, but this isn't encouragement, this is forcing you to use different weapon types. I like playstyle variety as much as the next guy, but I don't like it when developers try to force me to use something I don't want to use. And before I get to the reason I ultimately stopped playing Modern Warfare 2022, I gotta talk about the skill-based matchmaking in this game. I don't have a problem with skill-based matchmaking overall. But Jesus Christ, Modern Warfare 2 was on something else. Almost every time I checked the scoreboard, everyone in the game had a 1 KD. And you would think this is a good thing, but all that means is that everyone is in a cycle of getting a kill, then dying, then getting a kill, then dying, then getting a kill, then dying, so on and so forth. So basically there's no point in kill streaks since nobody is getting them. Skill-based matchmaking this strict makes sense if we're talking about a ranked mode of a competitive FPS game, but this is Call of Duty. There's no reason for the matchmaking to be this strict, especially when Call of Duty was built on a reputation of being the game where good players would be rewarded with overpowered kill streaks. They certainly didn't seem to care about kill streaks decimating noobs in Ground War. Ground War is basically Call of Duty's attempt at killing Battlefield, and while Battlefield is dying, it's certainly not because of Ground War. I think the mode has some potential overall, and it was definitely more fun than the core multiplayer. But whereas I stopped playing the core multiplayer because there were no kill streaks, Ground War had way too many kill streaks. Literally every player could earn their kill streaks like a normal multiplayer game, which just makes the whole match a giant clusterfuck of predator missiles, attack choppers, and constantly being spotted by UAVs. If the developers put some time into implementing some loadout or kill streak restrictions, then Ground War has some potential, but as of right now, it's just bigger Call of Duty. And if you like Call of Duty, then I'm sure that's no problem, but the COD formula has gotten stale for me. Back when I was a teenager who couldn't afford to buy a video game whenever I wanted, I didn't care that Call of Duty multiplayer wasn't very deep, or that every game only had like 1 or 2 viable playstyles. But now that I've been able to experience all the other great options there are for FPS games, Call of Duty just doesn't hit the same anymore. It's kind of like going from eating prime rib with a nice salad and a glass of wine, to eating a McDonald's cheeseburger. Is it going to fill you up for a bit if you're hungry? Sure, but after enough cheeseburgers, you're going to start asking for some fries or at least a Coke to wash it down. And after my time with Modern Warfare 2, that's pretty much my opinion of Call of Duty as a whole. It's video game fast food made to look good enough and taste good enough to appeal to the widest audience possible. And there's nothing wrong with that, except for the fact that Call of Duty is fast food charging fine dining prices to play it. I expect more from my games these days, and Call of Duty isn't delivering. So while Modern Warfare 2 was able to satisfy my FPS cravings for about a month, I got bored eventually, and Ground War was starting to make me miss another game franchise I played before.
You could not live with your own failure. Where did that bring you? Back to me.
Yep, we're back here again. You may recall earlier in the video where I dropped Battlefield 2042 because of how shit the launch was. Now I'm not going to bullshit you and say that when I came back to Battlefield 2042 midway through Season 3, it was a completely different game. We still had specialists instead of classes, some of the same vehicles were still overpowered, and some of the maps still needed to get reworked. But I could see the effort being put in, and an update that was going to bring classes back to the game was right around the corner. So I hopped back in, and once again, a Battlefield game was my go-to first-person shooter. Like I said though, there were still some problems throughout Battlefield 2042's life cycle, even after they finally added classes back into the game. Some of the maps were still absolute dog shit, and while DICE was reworking all the launch maps, this took them about 1.5 years to do because EA pulled as many resources as they could from this game after it understandably flopped at launch. So once again, resources that could have been used to make more maps were not being used to make more maps. We got 1 new map every season, which could have been 2 if they didn't have to dedicate people on the team to fixing their fuck-ups. Also, teamwork is still basically non-existent in this game. They put classes in the game which would typically mean that you had to work as a team now, but because everyone was so used to running around as a specialist who could take whatever gadget they needed to become a one-man army, the game has a Call of Duty-like culture where everyone is on the same team but nobody is really working as a team. Medics ignoring you and letting you bleed out was always a thing in Battlefield games, but it is so much worse in 2042. Also, half the time I try to play as an engineer who repairs vehicles, the vehicles just drive away from me because nobody is used to getting their vehicles repaired. The launch state of 2042 is far from the current state of the game, but you can still feel the effects of it. It's like riding on a ship that was bombed, but managed to be saved from sinking completely. Sure, it's functional, but if you look in certain areas, you can see the rushed welding they did around the holes and the shoring stopping the walls from caving in. All of these resources they had to put towards fixing the game also meant that each season brought way less content than they originally planned. Even compared to Battlefield 5, Battlefield 2042 received a lot less post-launch content, and if I were to compare it to Battlefield 4 or Battlefield 1, you would understand why so many people consider this game to be an outright failure, even after they fixed it and added more content. The biggest casualty in all of this is Battlefield Portal. This was supposed to be a community-led, developer-supported hub for Battlefield, bringing in great content from across the entire Battlefield franchise, and it received 0 content updates after launch. So now Battlefield Portal is just bot XP farms and milsim servers. I'm sorry, but if I wanted to fight brain-dead zombies, there's like a million different zombie games where I can do that. And if I wanted to play milsim, I'd be loading up Insurgency. Do you know how fucking cool it would have been to get a couple Battlefield 2142 maps in this game and have mechs fighting World War II Stukas, or how much fun it would have been to play Siege of Shanghai with 2042 characters and equipment? But no, we got none of that. Now at this point, you're probably wondering how this became my main FPS game if all I've done so far is talk shit. And that's because despite its flaws, I actually found a lot to like in 2042 once they fixed the launch problems and put classes back in the game. First and foremost is the progression. This game has a tier system that lets you unlock more badges and skins for using certain things, and this system covers basically everything. You can earn badges for everything from attack choppers to specialists to ammo crates to smoke grenades. Hell, you can even get a tier 1 skin for the tuk-tuks they have on some of the maps. This system made it to where I pretty much always had something to work towards in this game. I was always being rewarded for trying out new things, and I could equip the badges that most accurately showed other people what my playstyle was. There's a couple times where the grind was too insane though. One of the specialists named Boris gets the tier 1 badge for dealing damage with his turret, and his turret sucks dick. But for the most part, the grind for tier 1 skins is reasonable. You can't just unlock them overnight, but you don't have to treat the game like a part-time job to get them either. This game also has a pretty fun sandbox to play around in. I wouldn't say it's as great as Battlefield 4's, but there's still a ton of different ways you can play 2042. You can spend one match flying the drone and spotting enemies for your team, and the next you can spend in a fast-moving armored vehicle dropping off teammates around the map to take objectives, and the match after that can be spent taking power positions and posting up with your mobile minigun turret to mow down enemies. I also like that this game never went too far off the rails with the cosmetics. They came pretty close a couple times, don't get me wrong. And even though some of the skins they put in the game are kind of out there, the game is set in the near future, and the lore of the soldiers you play as is that they're basically a bunch of people from all sorts of military units and militias from different countries fighting for resources. So everyone not wearing the same uniform despite being on the same team and having some uniforms that don't look like they're from a conventional military makes sense considering the setting. Are you taking notes, Call of Duty and Rainbow Six? You see, it's possible to have some skins that aren't all that realistic without turning your game into a fucking cartoon. Battlefield 2042 had a horrendous launch that pretty much put the entire series on life support, and it never really made a huge comeback in my opinion. And while there's definitely some flaws with the game, I think it's a serviceable Battlefield game, and I can definitely recommend picking it up if you see it on sale for around $10. But it's far from the likes of Battlefield 4 and Battlefield 1, and the amount of wasted potential this game has is just sad. It was good enough to be my main FPS game for a while, but even that changed when a bunch of developers who, ironically enough, used to make Battlefield games, released a first-person shooter that easily became one of my favorite multiplayer games of all time.
Oh, he's almost dead! Yes, please. Oh, now we're on it! Oh my god.
Yeah, that's right. I just tricked you into watching another video where I glazed the finals. After spending north of 2 years playing FPS games that were serviceable but not really all that great, the finals came onto the scene and gave me a taste of what I've been missing this entire time. Finally, some good fucking food. The finals has a little bit of everything that I liked in all of the other FPS games I've played so far. Call of Duty style arcade shooting, movement that's just as good as Apex Legends, Battlefield levels of destruction, sites set up to defend your cash outs just like you can set up sites in Rainbow Six Siege, Overwatch style character abilities, and an absolute banger of a soundtrack. Does it have playstyle variety? I'm literally making a series showing just how creative you can get with the loadouts in this game. Does it have depth? I've played this game for hundreds of hours and I still learn new things all the time. Does it have good customization? Dog, there's basically a dress-up minigame inside this game. The Finals is one of the only FPS games that I've played that has all three pillars of a great FPS game, but I don't want to give off the impression that it's perfect because no video game is. I think the developers have definitely made some mistakes with this game. Back in Season 3, they switched the rank mode from Cash Out, which is this game's unique mode, to Terminal Attack, which is basically knockoff Counter-Strike. The medium class has clearly been the best class basically since the game launched, and while they got some much needed adjustments in Season 5, there was a while where you couldn't even play this game without running into triple medium teams that were basically unkillable with how easy it was for them to spam healing beams and defibrillators. And there's also some things they had to balance out, like nukes, which were basically insta-kill explosives you could throw at your enemies, Season 1 defibrillators, which made triple medium teams even more unbearable to fight against, recon senses, which gave medium players wall hacks, stun guns, which stopped you from aiming down sights, moving, or using abilities for like 7 seconds, and a few weapons that were way better than the other ones in the game. Then there's the matchmaking, which is kind of shit sometimes. It's not as bad as Call of Duty or Apex Legends, but if you're a solo player, expect to get a lot of teammates who struggle to do any damage to your enemies. And there's a lot of new players because people tend to quit on this game due to all of the depth and variety that I mentioned earlier. There's a lot to learn and not a lot of safe places for new players to learn the game, so lobbies in this game tend to be full of people who just installed the game or people who have been playing since it launched in Season 1 with basically no in between. Rainbow Six Siege had this same problem for a while, and I think they eventually found some solutions for it, and hopefully Embark plans on doing the same. Maybe they'll put in a new player playlist or something. But if you happen to be someone watching who just picked up the Finals, please do not quit this game. Yeah, I'm saying that because I don't want this game to die, but I don't want this game to die because it is the peak of modern FPS games. It has its problems, sure, but all of those problems are a lot worse in most of the FPS games that are popular right now. But after a year of the game being out, I think the developers over at Embark are starting to get a really good handle on this game. They also seem to have genuine passion for this game, which is something I don't really see with most developers. One of the community managers named Oscar does live streams where he plays the game and has some fun interactions with the community. They do a great job of communicating with the community about issues that are in the game and how they plan on fixing them. And there's even some skins in the game that basically started off as memes on the subreddit or the Discord. These developers got that dog in them. And considering that a lot of them were working on Battlefield back when those games were at their peak, it's no surprise that I've clicked with the Finals as much as I have. So I guess the only question left is, does the Finals beat Battlefield 4 as my favorite multiplayer first-person shooter of all time? Well, earlier I basically confirmed the answer is no. It's not quite there yet. For starters, the Finals doesn't have any vehicle combat, and I don't think it ever will. It was planned at one point, and even though I think some of these maps would work just fine with smaller vehicles like mopeds or dirt bikes, I don't see that happening anytime soon. Also, I don't feel like the Finals is a game I can just relax in. It's super competitive, and that's probably because the player count is smaller than Battlefield's. The game takes place in a competitive game show, and in the 12 or so years since Battlefield 4 released, the overall culture of FPS games has become a lot sweatier. I didn't touch on this before, but look up whatever your favorite FPS game is on YouTube, and I guarantee that at least half of the videos that get recommended to you are going to be named some shit like Insane Kill Montage, New Meta Loadout, or How to Reach Diamond Rank This Season. Don't get me wrong, I'm not knocking on these creators for filling in a demand for that type of content. Get your money, bro. But I'm personally not interested, which is why my content when it comes to the Finals is geared more towards showing you the perspective of a more casual player and giving you some goofy loadouts to have fun with. I'm just an average gamer, and that's the perspective I like to give, and that's why throughout this whole video, I never really made an effort to go really in-depth with these games. This video wasn't meant to be some highbrow critique of these games, so much as it was me looking back on all of these FPS games and what made me like them, and some other things I remember about them that shaped my view of FPS games as a whole. Also, this is far from an exhaustive list of all of the PvP FPS games I've played, as there's a bunch of them I didn't mention. Games that I put some time into but not enough to have a real opinion on them, like Far Cry 3 and 4's multiplayer modes, Halo Infinite, Fortnite, Plants vs. Zombies Garden Warfare, and Star Wars Battlefront 2. I know I was pretty negative in the latter parts of this video, and that's only because back in the day, I would stop playing FPS games because I found another great FPS game to play, but these days, I end up dropping the FPS games I'm playing because they get ruined by the people in charge of them. The Finals is currently the best multiplayer first-person shooter on the market in my opinion, but I know that even that game isn't immune to the bullshit that has caused other FPS games to fall off for me. Things like abandoning your audience or completely changing the game to try and appeal to a wider audience, stuffing the game with predatory monetization, or just slacking on the amount of content you deliver. So far, the Finals has managed to avoid any of this, and I hope it continues to be that way. But the Finals has only been out for a year, and it took Apex Legends and Rainbow Six Siege several years to go from games that the developers were genuinely passionate about to games that are basically a skin store first and a video game second. Hopefully that never happens to the Finals though, because like I said, this game is the peak when it comes to modern FPS games, and if it gets shut down or even worse gets turned into a giant store with no content to back it up, then I'm probably just going to retire from multiplayer FPS games altogether. Like I said, the only multiplayer FPS game I consider to be better than the Finals is Battlefield 4, and that game is almost 12 years old, so it's probably going to get shut down by EA any day now. But hey, Battlefield 6 is coming out soon, and maybe this time they'll get it right. My hopes aren't exactly high in that department though. But I don't want to end this video on a negative note, because even though there's a lot of bad to be talked about with some of these games, I still had some genuinely fun times on every game that I talked about in this video. And if even just one or two of you just sat here for however long this video ends up being, listening to me yap about these games, I really appreciate it. And if you want to listen to me yap about more games in the future, or see some of the goofy loadouts I make for the Finals, be sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel. But whether or not you do subscribe, thank you guys for watching, and have a good one.
Hey, we need 2 more kills, that's it. Stop pushing so hard. Let's go! Nice.
Good shit, y'all. Good shit, y'all. That was clean.